The King of Gujarat. I had covered wars before. I had seen villages buried under smoke, leaders crumble under pressure, and mothers weep beside broken walls. But nothing prepared me for that day in New Delhi, the day I stood before the man they called the King of Gujarat. His name was Narendra Modi. To the world, he was the Prime Minister of India, a figure of immense will and charisma. But to many in his home state, he was more than that. They spoke of him in reverent tones, as if he were carved from the same red earth that built the old forts of Gujarat. His rule, they said, brought both pride and power, discipline and destiny. Some called him the maker of modern Gujarat. Others, the monarch of its silence. I had come to interview him for an American network. It was meant to be another political feature, one of those sit-down conversations framed by soft lights and sharp questions. I had rehearsed my lines, memorized my facts, and promised myself not to blink. But as I waited behind the glass doors of the conference hall, surrounded by aides, translators, and security guards with eyes like statues, I could feel my chest tightening. The king was about to enter. When he did, it was not with the heavy-footed arrogance of power, but with the stillness of certainty. He moved slowly, his white kurta gleaming under the studio lights, his eyes calm, unwavering. The room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Even the air felt more disciplined, like soldiers falling into formation. He smiled, greeted the camera crew with a nod, and sat across from me, hands folded, posture straight. I began the interview. "Prime Minister Modi," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you've often been called the King of Gujarat, a man who transformed the state into a symbol of prosperity, but critics say that behind that success, there's a shadow, a cost to freedom, to dissent, to those who don't share your vision. How do you respond?" His lips curved slightly, almost amused. "Madame," he said, "every king, as you call it, must face the judgment of history, but I am no king. I am only a servant of my people." The way he said it, measured, deliberate, sent a ripple through the room. My translator whispered nothing. He understood that Modi's English needed no assistance. I watched the Prime Minister's eyes, dark and still as river stones, and felt the subtle gravity in his tone. It was the kind of voice that carried both kindness and command. I pressed on. "Yet some believe that under your leadership, certain voices have been silenced: journalists, activists, minorities. What do you say to them?" He did not flinch. Instead, he looked at me as though measuring the weight of my question and my conviction. "In my country," he said, "freedom is not a gift from the government. It is the soul of the people. You cannot silence a billion souls, madame." The words struck me harder than I expected. For a moment, the camera's red light seemed to fade. I remembered the faces of people I had interviewed in Gujarat, farmers who praised him, mothers who wept for lost sons, young women who saw in him a father, a protector, and yet others who whispered fears they dared not voice aloud. "Some say," I continued, "that your rule in Gujarat was absolute, that you were like a king who brooked no dissent." He smiled again, but this time the smile was faint, a trace of memory rather than pride. "In Gujarat," he said softly, "people do not need a king. They need someone who listens. When I was chief minister, I walked among them in their fields, in their temples, in their streets. They did not see a ruler, they saw one of their own. Tell me, madame, if a man works day and night for his people, does that make him a tyrant or a servant?" There was something almost poetic in the way he framed his defense, half humility, half proclamation. It was not what he said, but how he said it. Like a man who believed his destiny had long been written in the dust of his homeland. The room fell silent. I could hear only the low hum of the air conditioner, the soft clicks of cameras adjusting focus. My next question felt heavier now. "Mr. Modi," I said carefully, "there are those who still remember the violence of 2002. They call it a scar that never healed. Do you?" He raised his hand gently, not an interruption, but an acknowledgement. His gaze did not waver. "Madame," he said, "a scar means the wound has healed, but the mark remains. That is true. Gujarat has scars, India has scars, I have scars, but we cannot keep touching them forever. We must move forward." The tone in his voice had shifted. It was no longer political. It was deeply personal, even tender. The cameras captured it, but for a fleeting second, I forgot they existed. His eyes, unblinking, unwavering, held something between grief and resolve. I could feel the room breathing with him, the silence alive with emotion. Something inside me cracked. Perhaps it was the weight of all the stories I had carried, stories of riots, of children lost to mobs, of women searching for justice in the ashes. Perhaps it was his composure, his calm defiance, his certainty that destiny had already forgiven him. I felt my throat tighten, and before I could stop myself, a tear slipped down my cheek. The cameraman looked at me, uncertain whether to cut. The aides shifted uncomfortably, but Modi did not move. He simply watched me, not as a leader defending himself, but as a man seeing another human being break under the weight of her own questions. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I nodded, but words failed me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "It's just I've seen so much pain. And when you speak about scars, I think of them too." He leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable, pain. He said, "Is the mother of strength. You have felt it because you care. That is your duty as a journalist. Mine is to ensure my people have a future." The tears would not stop. I wiped them quickly, embarrassed, but the damage was done. The American journalist who had come to challenge one of the world's most powerful men had broken down live on international television. The King of Gujarat sat across from me, serene, unmoved, yet not unkind. The interview went on, though neither of us mentioned the moment again. We spoke of economics, trade, climate change, women's empowerment, and India's role in global leadership. His answers were precise, rehearsed, but occasionally colored with unexpected warmth. When it ended, he rose, pressed his palms together in a brief namaste, and said, "Thank you, madam. Truth must always be spoken, even when it hurts." As he walked away, the hall seemed to exhale. My crew looked at me, unsure whether to comfort me or congratulate me. I sat still, staring at the empty chair where he had sat. For the first time in my career, I did not know whether I had succeeded or failed. Later, when the footage aired, it went viral. American journalist Cries live over Modi's response. The headlines screamed. Some called me courageous. Others mocked my loss of composure. In India, the footage was dissected like a battlefield relic. Supporters praised Modi's calm dignity. Critics said he had manipulated the moment masterfully. But none of them knew what I had truly felt in that room, because what I saw was not just a politician. It was a man who had carried a state on his shoulders, who had risen from poverty to power, whose faith in destiny was as fierce as his belief in discipline. The King of Gujarat was not crowned by gold or throne, but by conviction, and by the millions who saw in him their own reflection. Weeks later, I returned to Gujarat to film a follow-up piece. The monsoon clouds hung low over the Sabarmati River. I walked through the narrow lanes of Ahmedabad, where the smell of spices mingled with the sound of temple bells. Everywhere I went, his face looked down from posters and murals, smiling, confident, eternal. I met an old man selling tea near the Sabarmati ashram. When I asked him what he thought of Modi, the man chuckled. "He is not a king, madam," he said. "He is like the son who went away and became something great, but we still wait for him to come home." Something in his words stayed with me. That evening, I stood by the river as the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the water gold. In the distance, the temple bells rang again, mingling with the calls of street vendors. For a moment, I understood what made this land so fiercely loyal to him. It wasn't fear, it was belonging, the kind that runs deeper than politics, the kind that binds people to their leaders through memory and myth. The King of Gujarat lived not in palaces, but in hearts. When I flew back to Washington, I carried more than my footage. I carried a strange sense of peace and unease. I had faced a man who believed himself chosen by history, who saw leadership not as privilege, but as destiny. Whether one admired or feared him, one could not ignore him. He was the embodiment of a paradox, gentle and formidable, humble and proud, democratic and regal all at once. Months later, I would replay the interview, listening again to the moment my voice cracked. I used to hate that sound, the tremor of emotion breaking through professionalism. But over time, I came to see it differently. It was not weakness, it was truth. For all his control, all his composure, Modi had reminded me of something journalism often forgets, that truth is not always cold, nor sterile. It is human, it bleeds, it trembles, it cries, and so did I. When the camera lights dimmed and the crew packed up, I found myself whispering a quiet goodbye to the empty chair. "Thank you," I said softly, for showing me the strength in silence. Perhaps he never heard, perhaps he never needed to. Because kings, real or imagined, do not seek acknowledgement. They exist in the echo, in the space between what is said and what is felt. And as the years passed, I knew that somewhere in Gujarat, among the river winds and temple bells, the king still walked listening, watching, waiting. And I, the journalist who once wept before him, still carried that moment like a secret scar, a reminder that even in a world ruled by power and politics, the heart remains the one thing that cannot be scripted.